Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with the one and only Lisa K. Donner, Graham Noble, Dave Patterson, and James Fight. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. On today's episode, the winds of a holy war. Where does the Democratic voter belong in the pro-Palestine push? The panel discusses the yeas and nays of the new guy and House Speaker, the dust has settled. Rounding out the discussion, we ask ourselves if the world is having a deja vu moment in campus life, a horror for Jewish students. All this and more coming up in this edition of the Conservative Five. This weekend, 7,000 pro-Palestinian protesters closed down the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City. In fact, pro-Palestinian rallies are popping up like the proverbial bad penny. The squad issued a warning to Joe Biden to be careful because he may lose the Muslim vote. Whatever happened to the Democrats and the Jewish vote, which they've had for like ever? The one and only Miss Lisa K. Donner is here with us today, and she has been covering a lot of this and can probably tell us who's behind this movement. You wrote an article on that very topic last week, and it's turning out to be one of the top articles of the year for Liberty Nation. What do you know, Lisa?
Well, it just took off, and I am glad to be on the panel and see everybody again. You know, I guess the question that was burning in everyone's minds was, who's behind this movement? And when I saw the picketers, I noticed these weren't homemade signs, but they were printed, and they had the name of organizations on the bottom of them. So it was really interesting. So I kept saying to Tim, stop the TV. What's the name of that organization? And I did some digging around, and the top of the list is the Democratic Socialists of America, or the DSA. And they are 92,000 members strong with chapters in all 50 states. The DSA apparently says they claim to be behind working people, taking up the cause of working people. But last I looked, Jewish people work too. So that sounds a little odd. I think the bottom line is that they champion the cause of Hamas. They're out to generate some general unrest. And it's interesting because on their homepage, they have a huge picture of a smiling, gleaming, well, it's not huge, but it's prominent, AOC on their website. Anyway, so they're like numero uno in the group that are backing these pro-Palestinian protests. Then there's a group called Answer. They were founded after 2000, right after 9/11. And Answer stands for, are you ready, guys? Do I hear an amen?
I'm not sure I want to know.
Act now to stop war and end racism. Initiated by the massive, and they were into like massive anti-war when the U.S. went into Iraq. So you can imagine what that's about. And they say their coalition openly supports the Palestinian struggle for determination, which tells you enough. Anyway, before I shut up, the ADL also says Palestinian Youth Movement, Students for Justice in Palestine, and the U.S. Palestinian Community Network are all prominent players in these anti-Israel protests. So there you go in a nutshell, Sarah girl.
Well, I'm telling you, this is so nice to have you back because you just brightened my whole day.
Thank you. It's so good to be here, especially with you.
Yeah, you have been sorely missed, but I understand that you have moved on to bigger and better. Jim, you covered an article on the Holy Land and who really is claiming the rights to the ground. Can you give us a bit of what you found when you were researching that article?
Yeah, sure. I made the subtitle of that article. There's so much more to this question than this, just who was there first. The pro-Palestinian protesters, they're saying they want to end the Israeli occupation of Palestine, which, I guess technically that's true. The Israelis are occupying Palestine. The Jewish people took that region from the people that were originally there thousands of years ago, not the Palestinian, Arab Muslims that are there now that are saying that they're the ones who belong there. But
it was the Canaanites.
It was the Canaanites and the Philistines.
Right.
Just where we get the name Palestine from, the Philistines. They were not Muslim. In fact, they worshipped a number of gods. But anyways, that's really neither here nor there. The Jewish people have been in that region for thousands of years since I mean, the kingdom of Judah was established in roughly 1000 BC. But the big thing is why can't there be Jews and Muslims there living in peace? And the reason for that is that the people of Palestine, not so much the people themselves necessarily, but the leaders right now, that's Hamas, but it's been other groups in the past. They don't want peace. They want from the river to the sea. They want Palestine eradicated. I'm sorry. They want Israel eradicated. I said it back.
Like, well, suicide bombing is a thing,
Right.
I guess.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
Right point, wrong word. Yeah, they want Israel to not exist.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen, and I think they're way outmanned and outgunned. That's what scares me the most, is because
that's proved out in recent history. I mean, this is the third or fourth time that they've tried to have a two-state contract that establishes a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, and the Palestinians always say, no, let's not do it. They start a war, Israel beats them, takes more land. It's
Dave, Israel's sorry, that was just kind of cracking me up a little bit, and maybe just hysterical giggles at this point. I'm tired. Dave, Israel claimed this week that they are entering the second phase of an attack against Hamas. What does that even mean?
Well, they've crossed into the Gaza Strip with their army and on the west side as well as the north, and they're moving toward Gaza City. They started by just short incursions to basically level the land to make it easier for their operations in northern Gaza. Today, they're closer to Gaza City, which will be a challenge for them with the urban warfare. And because it's always a challenge, it's one of the hardest ways to fight is city streets, having to clear every building one at a time. But nonetheless, they are making progress, and Hamas is suffering significant casualties. I think Hamas actually is surprised of the violence that Israel has been able to generate against their forces.
I mean, okay, let me back up and ask you like a qualifying question on that. Doesn't it seem like it would be just easier to, instead of going ground troops, wouldn't it be easier to do it all by air? Or are they trying to separate citizens from terrorists?
Well, as a former Air Force officer, I'm probably not going to generate a lot of goodwill, but the fact is that you can be a fighter pilot with your G suit and flying until the G suit squeezes you silly. But unless you have a person on the ground with a rifle that says, you can't have this square foot, I'm on it, you haven't won anything. And I think that Israel intends to make a significant and lasting statement that they will not tolerate Hamas in their region anymore.
And Graham, that's a perfect pivot to you, because you've been through this in a lot of different ways, and it seems like the situation is even spreading further. I mean, American troops have been fired upon. Hezbollah is bombing northern Israel. Syria's launched a few rockets. I mean, what the heck? What do you think is going on with the rest of the world, and where are they going to line up?
We shouldn't be deceiving ourselves here that this really isn't simply a war between Hamas and Israel. This is a war between Iran and Israel. Basically, Iran is fighting a proxy war, and Iran has a network of terrorist organizations that it sponsors throughout the Middle East. And of course, they now, these organizations are in Yemen, they are in Iraq, they are in Syria, they're in Lebanon, and of course, Hezbollah was actually created by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in the early 80s. So Hezbollah is very much an Iranian-sponsored group, and to a kind of a lesser extent, so is Hamas itself. And the thing about Hezbollah is it's much more as a fighting force that is far more effective and far more organized and more competent than Hamas will ever be. And also, the problem is that Hezbollah is not just a terrorist organization. It also has a political wing, and it has people in the parliament in Lebanon. In fact, a few years back, for a space of about 4 years, 4 or 6 years, Hezbollah and its allies and its political allies in Lebanon actually had a majority in the Lebanese parliament. And the president, Lebanon has a president and a prime minister, and the prime minister of Lebanon is a kind of Hamas, you could say, sympathizer or ally. So Hamas has a lot of political sway in Lebanon, and by extension, then Iran has a lot of political sway in Lebanon. And so this is way beyond. Everyone's talking about Hamas, but this is way beyond them. I mean, basically, Hamas is a group of homicidal maniacs. But Hezbollah is actually an army, and
Right.
once they get themselves fully involved in this, which they're going to, then this whole conflict is going to get much more dangerous for the Israelis, and it's also going to draw Lebanon into it. Iran is already getting more involved, so this thing could spread exponentially.
You know,
Denise, I'm
Graham,
going to
it's
pull you
inter-
back in here.
All
Pardon me?
right. I was just
No,
going
I
to
was
ask
gonna-
him a question. Go ahead.
I wanted to pull you back in and know, I mean, America's a melting pot. Are we going to see more of this kind of pro-terrorism, anti-Israeli outrage in our own country? I mean, it's a little disconcerting.
Well, I think to Americans, it's been rather shocking, the speed and the amount of pro-Palestinian sentiment that has been seen and heard of. People taking down pictures of those who have been held hostage in New York. That's a big deal now, and that's a big deal, and it's also petty at the same time. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on. It's like a cauldron that's been boiling that maybe we haven't noticed or haven't picked up on. But Graham, if I could ask you just a quick question. I've always sort of thought it like it's Israel against all the Arab world. I mean, there's this little postage stamp. It's called Israel. And then around them, they're surrounded by every Arab community. Lebanon is no friend, like you said, Hezbollah. Syria is no friend. They've been shooting off some rockets. So it's kind of, but I didn't really think of Iran as sponsoring all the Arab nations. I thought the Arab nations need to take a little bit of responsibility for that themselves. Maybe not so much in Lebanon, because Lebanon really has been taken over by Hezbollah, but I'm thinking about Syria.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's that part of this is there's a schism within the faith of Islam, of course, because you have Sunnis and Shias, and oftentimes they will team up, especially if they figure they have a common enemy, which is always Israel, of course.
Yeah.
But this is about this is less about the entire Arab world against Israel, because once upon a time that's what it was. But of course now there are several Arab countries that do have at least, if not friendly relations with Israel, they have some kind of uneasy peace with Israel, and they really don't want to. They don't want to tangle with Israel militarily. I mean, Egypt is quite happy with the status quo. So is Jordan, of course. But Iran, they are pulling the strings of all of these terrorist organizations, and so basically through them, they are essentially attacking Israel through their puppet organizations.
Dave, how's everybody funding this? How are these tiny little Arab nations that keep begging for aid? How are they doing all this?
Well, there is this, there is this axis of resistance that Iran coined, and so it's Iran. Certainly, Russia contributes to funding the terrorist networks, and to a lesser extent, North Korea and China. China, particularly with regard to Iran, as you know, the Chinese now see themselves as the great peacekeepers, since they brokered the friendship.
That's rich.
Between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But I think that one of the things that we have to realize too is that these things happen in the world because no one sees the United States as a prominent entity in the world anymore. When Iran fired a missile into a commercial tanker, Reagan took out 3 oil platforms, one of them being the Rashadat platform, where the U.S. Navy destroyed them all. And then the message was, and if that didn't get through, we will take your entire pipelines for your oil into the Arabian Gulf, and we'll destroy those as well. And amazingly enough, Iran stopped their harassment of oil tankers and cargo ships in the Arabian Gulf. Imagine that.
And when
Well,
we talk about who's financing all of this, you know, I'm not laying the blame solely at his feet, because that would actually not be fair. But let's not forget years ago those pallets of cash that the Obama administration flew into Tehran in the middle of the night. You know, we you know, I say we, not the American people willingly, but the US government, specifically under Democratic administrations, has to an extent funded these terrorist wars against Israel.
Well, I think it's time we stop doing that. You know, we seem to be skipping towards World War III. And if things don't change, it doesn't bode well in my world. The condition of the world is fragile right now, and Liberty Nation, well, we'll keep you posted, and we'll update you in real time with what we know when we know it. Thanks, panel. After 15 votes last January, we had a Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. 9 months, he was ousted by his own party. Steve Scalise couldn't get to first base. Jim Jordan never left the batter's box. Finally, Mike Johnson gets the nod on the first ballot. Big sigh of relief, right? Not so fast, players. We've all watched with frustration. There was a lot of chaos, but in the end, how did it turn out for the GOP? Graham has been following this as closely as possible, poor guy, and he's now up at bat.
Well, obviously, the first thing I would say, and it hardly needs expressing, is the fact that the GOP managed to at least put the debacle of the House Speaker fight behind them. You know, in terms of going forward, I think they are in possibly a better position legislatively than they were. But you know, here's the interesting thing about it is how did the Democrats really, how did they fare at the end of this fight? Because I wrote an article for Liberty Nation where I posited the idea that this really backfired on them, because they got rid of McCarthy, but now McCarthy is replaced by someone who is certainly more kind of more of a hardline conservative. He's less likely to bend at the knee to the Democrats, which is what McCarthy has done and was likely to continue doing. So even though I said that really this didn't turn out so well for Democrats, but there's another side to that story, and that is that maybe it turned out exactly the way they wanted, because you see the Democrats, I believe, are actually much more interested in scoring political points and firing up their base and getting reelected and retaining control of the White House than they are in actually passing constructive legislation and actually doing their jobs for the American people. So from that point of view, getting rid of McCarthy was actually good for them, because they got rid of this guy who they could never describe McCarthy as a right-wing extremist, a MAGA Republican, a demagogue. But now they've got someone in the Speaker's chair that they can describe as that. So in a way, in terms of political point scoring, this was a win-win for the Democrats. But in terms of just legislative progress, I believe it was a win for the Republicans.
Graham, let me just pick a bone with you. I think the first argument that you posited was the correct argument, and that is, McCarthy was ready to do a deal with anybody who came across his path. I don't think so much with Johnson. I think they did sort of shoot themselves in the foot legislatively. and they're going to pay for this.
Yeah.
And if a few of them had crossed over and saved McCarthy's rear end, I think they would have been in a better position than they are now. I'm just saying.
Absolutely. From a legislative point of view, from a point of view of governing responsibly, you are absolutely correct. They did completely shoot themselves in the foot. But I believe that, you know, I have a feeling, and it's sad to say really, but I have a feeling that a lot of Democrats were much more interested in sowing chaos and then being able to point to the guy in the speaker's chair as a MAGA extremist, you know, which they couldn't do with McCarthy. So again, in terms of from a partisan point of view, this turned out better for Democrats, but from a legislative point of view, yeah, you're totally right. They shot themselves in the foot.
I kind of think it's a hot mess because the Speaker of the House is supposed to be able to find the deal, cross the aisle, make connections. That's the job of the Speaker, not to be the only guy or only gal that says, no, screw you, it's our agenda or nobody's agenda. My biggest problem is, you know, I hate to say it, Nancy Pelosi made it look easy. I mean, she just kind of skated around and did her thing and was kind of rude and kind of dressed up all the time. But, you know, Jim, do you think this will go down in the books as one of the best or one of the worst?
Well, it's definitely going to go down in the books. Well, I'll give you that. You know, this is you kind of ran through the history in the intro for this segment, and this is the first time we've had this kind of a speaker battle. Well, it was the first time when McCarthy got elected for speaker. It was the first time since the Civil War we've had that many tries to get a speaker elected. First time in U.S. history we've had a speaker removed, and it's the same dadgum speaker. You know, and then you know, yet again, one of the longest speaker battles to finally go through. You know, oh, not this guy. Oh, nope, not that guy. Okay, another third guy. This is the one we're going to use. It historic for sure. Is it going to be good? I'm kind of with Graham on this. This might be a little bit better for the Republicans legislatively, but yeah, Mike Johnson's a guy the Democrats can campaign on. That's for sure.
I kind of think I missed the days of Tip O'Neill.
I know. I was just thinking about him too.
Yeah.
But which was the question? Is this going to be good? You know, meaning the speaker, or that the Republicans went through all this hoo-ha? I was trying
the hoo-ha part. I mean, it's
that's what's going down in history for sure.
People are embarrassed to think their government can't pull this off. You know, and then again, I have people asking me all the time, who is this Mike Jackson guy? It's like, well, it's Mike Johnson. And they're like, well, who is that? Who? They have no idea who this guy is. So and I don't really know him other than what I've learned, but I know Lisa does. So Lisa, what do you know?
It's funny. My text blew up that day, and I had a number of friends saying, have you ever heard of this guy? Do you know anything about this guy? Can you tell me something about this guy? It's really funny. But I just want to go on record as saying, Graham, who was covering this whole hoo-ha, as we're calling it, I'm sort of upset that it settled so fast there, because I know he wanted to write at least a dozen more stories on why
buried in hell of a circle of hell of his own creation.
Exactly. Like, why can't the GOP get their act together? But
Lisa, I had actually already written 221 articles, which were, you know, for each of the Republican members of the House of Representatives, you know, when they got their chance to run for speaker.
I really thought you were going to start taking hostages if they didn't come up with somebody. It was really funny.
The diciest part was Graham's behavior.
Keep him on the shelf, Graham. There's no guarantee this guy's going to last.
But I think it should be noted that maybe the Democrats, you know, we can argue about whether they gained or lost, but I think the Republicans really gained, and we shouldn't forget that. McCarthy, again, he was a deal maker, and Johnson's a bit more of an ideologue, and I think the GOP is going to gain from having somebody in there who can speak to both the MAGA folks and the non-MAGA folks. And in terms of who he is, he's a Republican from Louisiana. He's a strong professing Christian. He has a passel of kids. He came from a home where he was, I think, the oldest of four. His father was a firefighter who was badly injured in duty. And Mike really wanted to grow up to be a firefighter, and his parents were like, no, I don't think so. We're not going there. So he ended up going to law school. He was in the Louisiana legislature. And then he hit the U.S. House of Representatives in 2017. But the interesting thing about him is he's really been flying under the radar. I mean, raise your hand if you've heard of Mike Johnson before this whole business. You did? Okay, that's because you've worked.
I heard of him only by
places.
virtue of the fact that he was a representative from Louisiana, so I knew him from that. That's.
I confess, I did not know much about him. Sarah, Jim, what do you guys say?
Never heard the man.
I knew nothing. Knew nothing.
But I think that
had to go to the Google.
Right, that was his charm. See, he flew under the radar.
Well, and that's what I'm wondering. I mean, maybe, just maybe, people were so caught off guard. And that's what I was going to ask Dave. I mean, do you think, instead of picking somebody that everybody knows, do you think they picked this random guy in Louisiana that nobody knows, except for Lisa right now on panel? Do you think that was strategy, or was that just dumb luck, Dave?
No, I think that they actually did some thinking about this and chose a person who was steeped in conservative values, but that everyone liked. He is a likable guy. He's an ideologue, but he doesn't gag you with his views. And it also showed something to me, and it may be nuanced, but it showed me that when you have a Democratic Party who vote in lockstep, that can sometimes be a negative, not a positive, because they could have crossed the aisle and gotten whoever they wanted. But the fact is they didn't. They were unified, and that unification got them Mike Johnson. And I think
exactly.
Yeah,
I don't know. This whole process has been absolutely, I'm going to say clownish. Honestly, I've never been around this in all my political days. Jim, you look like you want to say something. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you call it clownish, but I mean, the circus has always been entertaining, and this is nothing if not entertaining.
I mean, it could be entertaining, but the whole thing leading up to 2024, we're just a hop, skip, and a jump away. And that's going to have an impact, whatever Republicans have done and whatever Democrats have done. And as we barrel into this, it's like, who knows who's ahead? They're all acting like morons.
No, you're right, Sarah. You're right.
In my estimation.
And we got to look forward to, Jim Jordan was a firebrand, right? But you look at somebody like Mike Johnson, and I think what you're going to end up with is somebody who's pretty darn savvy. Look at his budget right now. His supplemental appropriations gives $14.3 billion to Israel. And where did he take the money from? Anybody know?
The IRS.
Yes.
The IRS.
Slash the IRS budget. That puts the Democrats in a tough place. So now they can say, no, we want the money to go to the IRS. We don't want the money to go to the Jewish state. Really? That's not a great place to, I think, to have to defend yourself from. So
that's why, yes, legislatively, this is good for, Mike Johnson gives Democrats the perfect excuse to fire out their base and say, look, well, the Republicans now in the House are being led by a demagogue, a right-wing extremist, blah, 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 an election denier, despite the fact that the Democrats in the House are also led by an election denier. But that's another story. But here's the thing. And, if you look at especially over the last maybe 15, 20 years or so, and I'm sure if your better half or maybe your worse half, Lisa, Tim Donner, were here.
Oh, definitely my better.
With his knowledge, he would agree with me that generally speaking, the pattern of legislation in Congress is that whichever party proposes a bill, they'll get together and they'll fight it out between the two parties, And it will usually end up that they come to some kind of deal. Democrats get a bit of what they want. Republicans get a bit of what they want. And then once the legislation passes, Democrats turn back and say, oh, well, you know what, even though we agreed to give you what you wanted, we're actually not going to do that now. But we got what we wanted. And so often the Democrats have won those legislative battles. And with someone like McCarthy at the helm, holding the gavel, they could continue to do that. With Johnson in there, I think they'll have a much harder time doing that.
I thought you were going to say once they passed it, then they decided to read it.
Well, yeah, you got to pass the bill so you know what's in it. Yeah, of course.
Oh man,
You don't know how that happens very often with the top folks. They don't read it until after it's all said and done. Well, we should be glad that this mess has been settled. Whether or not Johnson can make it to term, well, we will see. And we will keep you posted as always. Thanks, panel. We're hearing about students hiding in the Cooper Union Library as an angry mob pounds on the door. Or how about Cornell? Police are called to investigate ugly, violent online threats targeting Jewish students. And a fire is set at the door of another student, Jewish, at Drexel University. What comes to mind? Peaceful protesting is a tenet to being an American. And we've seen this before, but this ain't peaceful. Graham, I'm just going to ask flat out, do you see similarities to the 1930s here?
Unfortunately, I think we should be kind of careful with the hyperbole, but I mean, let's face it, how every major atrocity and genocide that has ever happened in any country throughout history began with this kind of unrest and this kind of division. So I don't think we should play down the fact that this potentially could get really, really ugly indeed. One thing about Islamists is that they will always kind of co-opt any other movement, even if it's not exactly kind of ideologically or culturally aligned to what they believe in. They will kind of co-opt it to help further their cause. And in fact, the extreme political left has always done the same thing. It will co-opt any movement, any social movement, any single issue thing like environmentalism or animal rights or, Black Lives Matter or whatever it is. They will always co-opt it to further their goal, which ultimately it's not an exaggeration to say that their goal is the destabilization and eventual destruction of Western civilization, and nothing less than that. And so that's why you have this weird relationship between the left and Islamic fundamentalists, because this has got nothing to do with protecting Muslims against Islamophobia. This is about two groups with a common goal, which is the destabilization of the Western world. And now these students, who half of them have no idea about the history of the Middle East, but they find themselves now jumping on the bandwagon and cheerleading for Hamas, and of course they then in a position where they've got to go all the way. They've got to go all in. Right. They can't even now condemn the slaughter of 1,700 Jewish civilians in Israel. They can't possibly condemn that because no, we're sympathizing with the Palestinian cause. So they can't turn around at the same time and say, oh, but what they did over there was just terrible. So now whether they like it or not, they have become pro-terrorist, and it's really, and this anti-Semitic vein has always been very deep within the extreme left movement as well, and now we're just seeing it come out, and it's showing they're showing their true colors. But I think this could get, something has to be. I'm all for free speech and demonstrations and protests and all the rest of it, but this literally could get to the point where Jews and Jewish students and Jewish civilians are actually just being targeted in the street. and where do we go from there? That's getting pretty bad.
Lisa, you wrote a really powerful piece regarding most of the things I've already just mentioned, the attacks on the students, and just hanging out with my little pals at the pub, the Foxhole. Steve McIntosh read that and had tears in his eyes. And he said, I had no idea this was going on. Why do we not have any idea that there's so much hate crimes across the country in the university?
The rapid pace with which anti-Semitism has been growing, I think, since the start of this Hamas-Israeli war is really, I think, quite shocking to most Americans. And I just want to let you know that I went through a kind of dark night of the soul trying to decide whether I should include the actual rant that somebody wrote. Now, it wasn't published in a Cornell website, but it was posted, I believe, on another website that a lot of the Cornell people read. It was so vile, so hateful, so horrible, it actually made my stomach turn. And I didn't know if I should publish it or not, but I wrote the story without it. And then I said, I don't think people understand until they read this. And I put in the actual post. And
yeah, it was mind blowing. And I mean, I've had people, I'm not covering any of this really for Liberty Nation. So I always send them to who is, and your go-to. And Steve called you out by name. He goes, how is this even going on? And thank God somebody's talking about it, because nobody's talking about it.
It's really horrible. If we look at the rate of Jewish hate crimes versus Muslim hate crimes in the US, it's not even close. We're talking about 4.5 hate crimes committed against Jews for every one committed against Arab and or Muslim. And you should put that list together because the FBI separates them out. But that information is not from the Anti-Defamation League. Those figures are from the FBI database. So you can take those to the bank. And like I said, they separate out the Arab hate versus the Muslim hate. But if you put them together, it still comes up to 4.5 Jews get the hate crimes versus over one Muslim or Arab person. So, there you go. There it is in black and white.
Well, I know one thing. I don't know whoever this person was that told the Jewish students to hide in the attic.
Oh my gosh.
They should be publicly flagged, flogged, fired, and done with in any way, shape, or form in education. That is so unbelievably uncalled for.
I think
go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, I think one of the most dangerous things about this is that the progressive left here in the United States, probably in the rest of the Western countries as well, but certainly in the United States, the progressive left has always they always like to talk about hate and intolerance, and
right.
They've always accused the right of being guilty of that, and they've always made it out as if actually any anti-Semitism in this country is also on the right, because they hark back to they hark back to basically the Nazis and their anti-Semitism. And of course, Nazis are always portrayed as being right-wing extremists, even though Nazism was a form of socialism. That is a historically correct fact. Nazism was actually a form of socialism. But they connect the right to Nazis, and then they say, so the right is guilty of anti-Semitism. So now they can actually get away with anti-Semitic language and threats and even acts of violence. But the media, the left-leaning media, is never going to point out that this is a left-wing problem. The media is just going to say, oh, we've got growing anti-Semitism. And they will assume that most Americans will think, oh, well, that's a right-wing thing, anti-Semitism. So they're almost doing it by stealth.
They can run, but they can't hide, Graham, from the politics of this. Let's face it, the Jewish community has almost always voted Democrat. What do they do now? Yeah. I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll continue to vote Democrat. It is
no.
It's the fate of Kristallnacht when the Jews knew what was happening to them, and yet they continued to stay. But I think it's important to note something, that Democrats and the Jewish community have always had this bizarre relationship. They loved FDR, but FDR in 1939 turned away the USS St. Louis with 939 refugees from Hitler's Nazis. And if he didn't personally turn them around, like Saul, he stood by in agreement. This has never been something that's easily understood, but yet the Jewish community is steadfastly democratic when they have really nothing to show that the Democrats have done to do anything for them.
I could name a couple of other ethnic minorities who could say the same thing.
Right.
Oh, you mean like the Irish?
Pretty much all of them, don't you think? Any way, shape,
all
or
of them,
form, if
pretty
you
much,
look
yeah.
at it.
You name it.
Goodness gracious. And Jim, how do you reasonably stop this kind of hate? I mean, personally, I think we're just going to have to fight it out. I don't see any peaceful solution to what's going on right now.
Yeah, how do you make peace with the sort of the suggestions? I won't even repeat some of the things that I've read that some of these people are suggesting that you do to Jewish people, specifically Jewish women and Jewish children. It's horrible. All I can say is, look, if anyone out there hears any of these things, threats directed towards Jews, report it. Call the police. If it's at a university, tell the university staff. If it's at a business, get a hold of management. Report it. I mean, these are actual threats of violence. These are real threats of violence.
Well, you're right. I was just thinking about, they caught the guy that posted that horrible thing towards the Cornell students. So, that's
that involved a number of horrible things, the least horrible of which was throwing them off cliffs.
Yeah.
True. I mean, that was the easy way out.
Right. When that's the mild part of the threat, my goodness.
I think that what we should think about too is, by comparison, what if these things were said by white males against the LGBTQ community? There would be the shortest amount of time. Nanoseconds would go away there between the time they were apprehended, charged with hate speech, and put in jail.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing about that, Dave, is that the white male being the one that actually says it, that's the part that matters the most in that. I mean, if I came out and came out with a bunch of anti-Semitism, the left will be crawling all over me, as if they didn't believe the exact same thing.
Well, lucky for him, he was Asian.
Yeah.
I actually think, I believe that the Republican Party has a duty to pin this anti-Semitism on the left, not on all Democrats. There's a big difference here. There's an awful lot of Democrats in this country who are not on board with what is going on here.
Exactly.
With this whole pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish.
It's going on. It's going on in academia.
Most Democratic voters are not on board with this, but the progressive left is on board with it.
Yes.
And they need to be called out for it.
But, much like we were talking earlier about the minority groups, be it Jews or any other minority groups that still vote Democrat, the issue is they bought the hype. So I don't know how, I don't know why, but for some reason the left is just awesome at advertising. They've got the propaganda game down pat. Nazism was always a left-wing thing. A lot of the giants in American giants of left-wing history were Nazi sympathizers. Planned Parenthood, that used to be the American Eugenics Society.
Mm-hmm.
But again, certain people
they are
because
genius at switching the narrative.
Well, they've got the media, and they've got the
Mhm.
they've got the world of academia, and they've got the media, and they've got the entertainment industry all pretty much on their side. So,
But now,
Yeah.
now they've
Oh,
got
yeah.
the business community, and that's where Republicans historically had the chambers of commerce, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's swapping around too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really interesting. But I'm glad you said that about not every Democrat,
Mm-mm.
because I believe that that's not true. But it
No,
is
but
really,
we're
really ugly out
radicalizing.
there. It's really ugly out there. And
It is. And we're radicalizing, high school and college students, almost like the Hitler Youth of the 30s. We're creating this group of people through these institutions that hate.
part of the problem, though, Sarah, don't you think it's education, a lack of education, a lack of understanding? They say from the river to the sea. If I stuck a microphone out on the street and I asked these young kids what river and what sea,
They wouldn't have a clue.
Yeah,
exactly.
to your point, Lisa, one of the protesters waving what they thought was a Palestinian flag, which turned out to be an Italian flag. But
I know.
I mean, these
Oops.
people are intellectual slugs.
But it's our fault because we didn't educate them. We didn't tell them what the Holocaust was. They did surveys and found out that some ridiculous percentage of the American population doesn't believe that 6 million Jews were killed. They said, well, maybe 1 or 2 million.
But
Or
And a lot of people are saying it was the plague and they just called it that. It's
right.
Right, because that makes it okay, Lisa. If it's only 1 or 2 million, that's not that big.
General Eisenhower, before president, said he told everyone, you take pictures, you document everything because nobody will ever believe this 50 years from now. And he's right. People are starting to go, well, that didn't really happen that way. It's crazy. And, our younger generations are, they used to be the peace, love, harmony purveyors. How did this generation get so twisted around?
Well, they were also
now into hating Jews.
Ran out of
there were also Black Panthers, and there's also the Symbionese Liberation Army. They were blowing up federal buildings long before you and I were out of high school.
True.
I think if you want to look at who to blame ultimately, I'm afraid we have to look in the mirror. In the 1960s, when we elected Nixon and basically got rid of all of the protesters in Chicago, pick your favorite big city. And Nixon was elected, and all of us who were voting Republican patted ourselves on the back and said, "Phew, I'm glad that's over. We went about our business." Whereas the other side went to our universities and became professors, and now we're reaping the benefit of that.
I just wanted to mention one of the most profound books I ever read was by David Horowitz, who was one of the crazed hippies, and he
Red diaper babies. Red diaper babies.
Yes, exactly. And he transformed into a conservative, and it was really a fascinating book. It was called Radical Sun. I just recommend it.
Right.
Good to know. Well, guys, I don't think we can fix this, but at least we got it all out in the open for our viewers and people that tune into Liberty Nation on a daily basis. Anyway, thanks, panel. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at LibertyNation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.